Doom is the father of the FPS genre, standing the test of time for 30 years. It's known for pushing players to and beyond the limits they know to succeed. Some of these players can beat it fast enough to speedrun it. Some of them even make history. I interviewed Doom's legendary Zero Master to learn what it takes to become the greatest, breaking down what goes on inside his head that most others don't even know to dream of. My name is Allstin, and this is the story of an absolute legend. This is the history of how Zero Master dominated Doom. First, let's take a look at where the Doom guy himself began. In his words, I played Doom back in the 90s, then again in 2008 or 9 or so, because we had our own laptops in school. It was around 2012, I played an easy FPS game, I think it was Bulletstorm, so I tried Doom Nightmare just for the challenge, gave up and looked it up on YouTube. I then ended up watching a speedrun of it on the site by Henning Skogstø, but my speedrunning didn't start until 2014 when I watched Games Done Quick and King Dime play Plutonia. Then I played Plutonia up to 6 months or so later and started myself." End quote. Carl Jobst has an excellent video on Zero Master's history and achievements that I'll link in the description, but this one takes a different angle. Not what he did, but how he did it. Now that we know where his beginnings were, we need to go back to the basics, the fundamentals. I asked Zero Master what it takes to reach the elite level of speedrunning from a gameplay and mechanics sense, and he broke it down into 3 core concepts. He said, I suppose good mouse and keyboard control are fundamental, which you eventually get good at when you've played for 20 years. Aim isn't really that important in classic Doom, since it's pretty easy to hit your target though. As for speedrunning, it's a good idea to manage your time well. There's 3 things you kind of need to balance: routing, practice, and doing attempts. For example, setting a new record is pretty easy, if you have a lot of time you can save over previous strategies, as you can afford to be worse or slower in other places. And if you don't practice, you end up wasting time by having to reset to stupid stuff. Like, imagine not practicing Icon of Sin at all and just dying there over and over. Of course, you get some practice doing attempts as well, but it's better to just focus on the difficult things or places where you expect something to go wrong. So unless the route is basically perfect, then it's not worth putting all your time into doing attempts, since the biggest time saves could come from just improving the route or getting more consistent by practicing. For a game like Doom Eternal, understanding how the game works is pretty straightforward and easy. Classic Doom is a little different though, as the game is a lot about getting around monsters in tight corridors, depending on the category of course, so perfecting the route is more difficult. I don't know what to say about situational awareness really, just that it's important and together with decent aim, it'll get you through any FPS game. End quote. Situational awareness is something I want to touch on. It's knowing what's going on all around you in all directions, even predicting what will happen next based on enemy AI and various scenarios that you may find yourself in. See, Zero Master has a great ability to be able to adjust accordingly based off of what's happening, though generally he tries to stick to a certain plan. I have an entire breakdown with examples of situational awareness that I'll link here, and it includes me playing Doom blindfolded at the Cyber Demon. So we see there's a science to going fast, and the details of mastery could take hours, days, or even years. But what's the secret to being able to produce results reliably enough to see a trend of improvement over time? And that answer is consistency. Before we get to Zero Master's next story, we need to visit one trait he has that has undoubtedly stood the test of time, for both classic Doom and modern, which we'll also talk about shortly, and he incorporates it heavily still to this day, and that is, of course, consistency. The thing about classic Doom's speedrunning is that it's essentially an Ultra Nightmare Perma-Death challenge. One death, and it's all over. So being able to have a sense of consistency, reproducing your results, is beneficial in many ways. Firstly, you save time by not having to repeat things over and over again beyond regular restarts. Secondly, you have a better understanding of how far you can generally get, areas that seem to give you trouble, and others that you can just breeze past. This is worth making an extra note about. When you watch a Zero Master run, you know that he will more than likely perform very well. If he were inconsistent, you never know how the run was going to go that day. Even his in-game Doom 2016 and Eternal challenges, ones that make or break the run, are at a very steady 95% plus success rate. These are a huge worry for runners, especially those less experienced or without consistency. Imagine the pressure of being 2 hours or more into a run and it just dying due to a mission challenge. Consistency and the next point that I make are required to succeed here. And thirdly, you develop something that we need to talk about because it's a must to perform at the top levels. As Duke Nukem says,
balls of steel.
when you've been doing this for as long as Zero Master has, you begin to develop nerves that can withstand pressure. See, a common trait beginner and intermediate players have is fear. Listen to this saying, it's so important. Quite often, the strongest enemy isn't in the game, it's in our head. Think about that one. See if you can relate to this. When a bad situation happens or it's all on the line, you choke. If you don't have the years of experience, both successes and failures, that's important, to learn from, to be able to push that to the back of your mind and focus unwavering on the task at hand, then your consistency and success percentage drops. Failure is a huge teacher, and Zero Master, as a human, has had his fair share of those as well. I'll elaborate on that soon because Zero Master's approach to failure is a little different than what I just mentioned. Zero Master has done this so much and has developed such a keen mental strength that even though he is facing a challenge where the stakes are high, he can push through. Not to say that he isn't nervous, that's normal human behavior, but the control of his nerves are a skill set that he has that many don't. Developing this over time will lead to a much stronger game without even changing anything physical. In fact, it will let that physical execution that you've practiced in the low-risk settings manifest and show itself in the high-risk situations when normally it would fail. Speaking of high risk, let's talk about how he dominated Ultra Nightmare. First, Doom 2016, then Eternal and the DLC The Ancient Gods. He was the first player to clear Doom 2016 Ultra Nightmare, and he did it on day 2. But did you know that he came so close on the very first day of release? Let's see what he has to say. I did have a death in 2016 Ultra Nightmare in the last arena on the day of release, and I believe I only had a single Baron left and was just about to fire my BFG when he got me as I was cornered. You can actually see my tombstone for a frame or so in my Ultra Nightmare 2016 video. I don't think I was particularly nervous when I did those. I had already done Plutonia on Nightmare before, and with Classic Nightmare, you just have to stick with what you've planned, because if you try to improvise, you'll die. Of course, there wasn't much of a plan for 2016 Ultra Nightmare. I remember I saw someone one-shot a Revenant with the Siege Gauss. Well, I had never even tried the weapon mod, so my Ultra Nightmare clear was actually the first time I used it. I had no idea Siphon Grenades could get back armor with the rune as well, which would have helped a lot." End quote. So even without these tools, he's really good. We can see that from a no-upgrade 2016 run a mere month after release. But what about Doom Eternal and the DLC? It was a little different. Zero Master said, "It took a while before I did Doom Eternal Ultra Nightmare though. I was just too tired to even attempt it. My very first attempt past Cultist Base went all the way. Afterwards, my very first speedrun attempt of it went all the way too, but of course I knew the game quite well by then. I didn't really find it challenging in my first playthrough at all, and it wasn't really as interesting as 2016, as the developers claimed that even they couldn't beat it and such, so it got a bit more attention from that claim." End quote. Zero Master was also the first person to beat the Doom Eternal The Ancient Gods Part 1 DLC mere hours after the release. Regarding the DLC, Zero Master did have one more point to add. If anything, it confirmed just how important awareness is really, especially with the spirits and knowing if there's something nearby that will kill you if you try to microwave them." End quote. There's a very key point that leads us into the next interview question: innovation and ingenuity. See, speedrunning isn't all that Zero Master has done. To be considered by many as the greatest, it's about more than just going fast. You have to be innovative, finding and discovering things that most people wouldn't even think to look into. And sometimes that can take a while, even up to 25 years. For the trick that surprised John Romero himself, Doom 2's final secret, the pain elemental of map 15. Let's see how Zero Master found it. Well, the pain elemental thing was basically done by accident, as it was originally discovered on Plutonia, where there also happens to be only one missing secret with a similar map error. There just so happened to be a pain elemental right next to it. Of course, the pain elemental thing moving the player up and down was already known, but it was happening on an elevator going upwards instead of a wall going downwards. So once I noticed that I got the secret on Plutonia, I knew it would also work for Doom 2 map 15. End quote. There's a really good explanation of the technical side of this trick on Zero Master's channel, and I'll link it in the description for you. Remember how I mentioned failures earlier, and how Zero Master has a bit of a different mindset regarding those? What if the situation goes wrong and things just aren't working out? There's another skill he has that understands and predicts what to do, but in a different way than situational awareness, does he have a good sense of adaptability. Zero Master has a bit of a different approach to failures and adaptation, and I'll teach you. What we see, those moments and hours for successful runs, is the result of years of practice and failed attempts. We say that he makes it look easy, and he does, but we can't forget about how many runs have died along the way. This is important. If you can't learn from your failures, figure out what you did wrong and why, then you're going to have a harder time reaching your potential. Zero Master and Doom's design know this, and he is able to improve upon areas that have conquered him. But here's the thing that separates Zero Master. He trains to make failure as close to non-existent as possible, but it's kind of in his own way. In his words, I suppose an important thing for me is to practice to the point where failure is unlikely as possible. Doom Eternal, for example, I did 3 Ultra Nightmare 100% clears in a row if you ignore the missed Elena log and the death at the Icon of Sin. Because the time was bad, it'd be a waste of time to throw away attempts at a 3-hour-long run at the very end. The same goes for Classic Doom as well, of course, but there's only so much I can do. No amount of practice or routing will make Nightmare trivial. So I suppose that I try to learn from failure during practice instead of during attempts if possible. It's not too often I decide to change something after starting and failing attempts, but it happens of course if I miss something." End quote. So it's almost a twisted case of the classic adage of the student and master, or in this case, Zero Master. Failure starts as the master and we're the student, but as the old saying goes, you eventually learn to overcome and exceed beyond it, so that the students can overtake that master. But at the same time, you always respect the master, especially in Doom, because it will humble you very, very quickly. And many Ultra Nightmare players know this. We also don't see the mass of knowledge inside his head, and quite often, it's a community effort. People come together, find techniques, tricks, and traps, and learn how to break the game with an analytical mindset. The application of this knowledge, not only knowing what to use, but when and also why, leads to success. It's truly the trial by fire, finding, analyzing, and eliminating as many errors as possible, consistently to become one of the greatest. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and Zero Master has been able to stay in the game as longevity is key, adapt, learn, and apply everything he's learned and discovered, which also helps him find even more new things that others haven't even thought about. So, how did Zero Master dominate Doom? It's more than just the speedruns of classic, of new, of speed, and of pure 100% combat. The development of these nerves of steel, despite the risk of losing it all in a run. It's the ingenuity, innovation, and perseverance. Looking failure in the face and then proceeding to rip and tear it. It's breaking boundaries, ones that nobody has ever done before. Likely because we never knew these boundaries even existed. It's not putting a cap on any human achievement and success, because the sky is the limit on figuring out what is truly possible. So that, my friends, that is how Zero Master dominated Doom. My name is Allstin. Thanks for watching.